Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to discover that your entire life is built on a lie? A secret that was hidden from you for years, one that could completely change everything you thought you knew about yourself. Imagine you're going about your normal life, everything seems fine, and then, out of nowhere, a single DNA test shakes the very foundation of your reality. This isn't some ordinary medical test. No, this is a test that reveals something so shocking, so bizarre, that you can't even begin to wrap your head around it. Your identity, the one you've spent your whole life building, might not even be yours to begin with. I know what you're thinking, this can't be real, can it? But trust me, this story is as real as it gets. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll have your mind blown, and you won't be able to stop thinking about it. This is the story of a rare disease, a simple DNA test, and two lives that were switched in the most unbelievable of ways. But I want you to do something before we dive in. I want you to think about your own life for a second. Think about your family, your memories, your history. What would you do if you found out that none of it was real? That the people you call family might not even be your family? You're about to meet someone whose life turned upside down after a shocking medical discovery. This isn't a movie, this is reality, and you're about to experience it firsthand. But before we continue, I need you to promise me something. Stay with me until the very end. You're going to want to, because everything you think you know will change as we unfold this story. Let's begin in a small town, not too different from the one you might live in. It's a place where everyone knows each other, where secrets are hard to keep, and where life moves at a slower pace. This is where we meet Jane, an ordinary woman in her early 30s who lives a simple life with her family. Jane had always been healthy, active, and full of life. That was until one day, she started feeling off. Nothing too alarming at first, just minor symptoms, fatigue, random aches, and unexplained dizziness. At first, she brushed it off. We've all had days where we feel a little off, right? But as time went on, things got worse. Her symptoms weren't going away, they were escalating. What started as a minor issue soon snowballed into something that was clearly more serious. That's when Jane decided to visit her doctor. A few tests and weeks later, Jane was diagnosed with a rare and mysterious disease that her doctors couldn't quite explain. The disease had a name, but no one really knew much about it. All the tests and medications only seemed to make things worse. It was as if she were slowly losing control of her own body, and she needed answers. Desperate to find a solution, Jane turned to a genetic test, hoping that the answer could be buried in her DNA. What happened next, though, was something she never could have predicted. You see, this wasn't just any regular genetic test. This was a test that was about to uncover something shocking, something so unbelievable, it would send her down a rabbit hole of twisted truths and hidden secrets that would change her life forever. Are you starting to feel the chills down your spine yet? Hold on, because this is just the beginning. The results came back, but not in the way Jane, or anyone else for that matter, expected. Imagine her shock when the DNA results revealed something that turned her entire life upside down. The test didn't just diagnose her disease, it uncovered a bombshell. Jane's identity wasn't actually her identity. The test matched her DNA to someone else. And not just anyone, but to someone living in a completely different state, in a family that was completely unfamiliar. Someone who had a completely different history, a different life, a different set of memories. At first, Jane couldn't even comprehend what this meant. Her mind raced with questions. How was this possible? How could she, a woman who thought she knew everything about herself, suddenly learn that her identity had been mistaken all along? Was she the person she thought she was? Or was she living someone else's life? Here's where things take an even more bizarre twist. Jane reached out to the family whose DNA she had been matched with, but they didn't seem surprised at all. In fact, they were just as confused as she was, but the more they talked, the more strange things started to unfold. There were gaps in their story, inconsistencies, things that didn't add up. You're probably wondering at this point, who's telling the truth? Who is Jane really? But the truth was, neither Jane nor this other family had the full picture. What they did know was that they were connected in a way that no one could explain, and neither family was willing to back down without answers. Now, I want you to stop and think. You're probably on the edge of your seat right now, trying to piece together what could have happened. Trust me, you're not the only one feeling this way. Jane was in the same boat, and she was determined to get to the bottom of this strange mystery. But here's the thing, as Jane dug deeper into her DNA results, she realized something terrifying. The rare disease she had been diagnosed with, the one that was supposed to be so unique, had one very peculiar trait. It was a disease that had been tied to another genetic condition, a condition that might hold the key to everything that was happening to her. A key that could potentially unlock the mystery of her true identity. But the deeper Jane went, the more disturbing revelations she uncovered. The disease wasn't the only thing linking her to this mysterious family. In fact, there were even darker secrets hiding in plain sight, ones that no one could have ever imagined. What was once thought to be an innocent genetic test turned into a complicated web of deception, lies, and switched identities that had been hidden for decades. You might think you know where this story is headed. Maybe you think you've figured it out. But trust me, there's a twist coming that you'll never see coming. The truth is more twisted, more complicated, and more shocking than you could ever have imagined. And the best part? You're about to discover it all. But there's one question you need to ask yourself. Are you ready to know the truth? Can you handle what Jane is about to uncover about her identity? Keep watching, because we're about to take a deep dive into the shocking truth behind Jane's DNA test, and when you find out what happened next, you'll be speechless. Stay with me, because you won't believe how this mystery unfolds. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about identity, family, and the hidden truths in our own DNA. But first, let's take a moment to reflect on what Jane's discovery means for her. If her identity has truly been switched, what does that say about the nature of identity itself? Who are we, really, when the very essence of who we are, our genetic makeup, can be so easily distorted? Keep those questions in mind, because by the end of this video, you'll not only have the answers you've been searching for, but you'll also have your own mind spinning with the unimaginable possibilities that Jane's story uncovers. So, stay tuned, because the truth is about to get even stranger, and this is just the beginning. As Jane tried to process the DNA results, everything in her life began to unravel. The DNA match wasn't just a piece of scientific data, it was a doorway into a maze of confusion and chaos that she never expected to enter. To understand how she arrived at this point, we have to go back a little, to the months leading up to the test. It all started when Jane noticed something was off. At first, she assumed it was stress. She had been juggling work, family responsibilities, and a slowly deteriorating health condition that doctors could never fully explain. She'd been to specialists, but no one could put a name to what she was experiencing. They told her to take it easy, rest more, and avoid overexertion. But it wasn't working. The symptoms didn't go away, they worsened. In a moment of desperation, she decided to take the next step, a genetic test. It seemed like a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, it could uncover something doctors had missed. What Jane didn't know was that this test would set off a chain of events that would spiral out of her control. It wasn't just her health that would be affected, it was her entire life. The rare disease, which she'd thought was simply a fluke, was suddenly linked to a family she had never heard of, people who, according to the DNA results, were now part of her bloodline. Her curiosity turned into obsession as she began researching this family, trying to figure out how in the world their lives were tied to hers. But every attempt to reach out to them was met with silence, or worse, a cryptic response that only deepened the mystery. As she delved deeper into the family's history, she started to uncover unsettling facts. The disease was not just rare, it was tied to a dark secret, something that had been kept hidden for generations. Jane's search for answers seemed to be drawing her closer to a truth that no one wanted to face. But there was another layer to this puzzle, one that Jane was only beginning to notice. Her relationships, those that had once been a source of comfort, started to feel strained. Her family, who had been supportive through her health struggles, began acting strangely. Her parents, who had always been warm and nurturing, seemed distant. There was a coldness in their eyes when they spoke to her, as if something was weighing heavily on their minds. Jane tried to brush it off as stress or worry about her condition, but something in her gut told her it was more than that. They wouldn't talk about it, no matter how hard she tried to pry. And her brother, who had always been her closest confidant, had started avoiding her calls. He'd been traveling more often, disappearing for days at a time without explanation. She wondered if her own illness had become too much for them to bear, but there was a nagging suspicion that something else was going on, something that no one was telling her. It wasn't just her family that had changed. Her relationships with friends began to fray as well. One evening, she met up with Sarah, a longtime friend who had always been there for her, but this time, their conversation took a strange turn. Sarah, who usually spoke with the warmth and sincerity of someone who truly cared, seemed evasive and guarded. She wasn't her usual self, and Jane picked up on it immediately. When Jane mentioned the DNA test results and the mysterious family connection, Sarah's face grew pale. She quickly changed the subject, but Jane could tell something was off. There was fear in Sarah's eyes, fear that didn't make sense, not for something as simple as a genetic test. But why would Sarah be scared? Could it be that Sarah knew more about the situation than she was letting on? Or was Jane just overthinking it, projecting her own anxiety onto the people around her? It was around this time that Jane received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the caller identified himself as a private investigator. He claimed to be looking into the same mysterious family tied to her DNA results and wanted to meet in person. At first, Jane was hesitant, unsure of whether this was some kind of scam or if she was being dragged deeper into something sinister. But her curiosity got the best of her, and she agreed to the meeting. When they met, the investigator seemed genuine enough, but he had an unnerving way about him. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as if he had a personal stake in this case. He asked her about her family history, her medical background, and even some personal details that seemed unnecessary for a simple investigation. Jane found herself wondering who this man really was, and why he was so interested in her. Was he just doing his job, or was he involved in something much bigger? But it wasn't just the investigator who had Jane on edge. There was another name that kept coming up in her research, Dr. Elizabeth Wright, a geneticist who had worked on a similar case years ago involving the rare disease Jane had been diagnosed with. Dr. Wright had published a controversial paper on the genetic markers associated with the disease, but her findings had been dismissed by the scientific community. It seemed like she had vanished into thin air shortly after the paper's publication. Jane's instinct told her there was more to Dr. Wright's disappearance than met the eye. Could the doctor have uncovered something so dangerous that she was forced into hiding? And if so, was Jane somehow linked to whatever Dr. Wright had uncovered? Every new clue seemed to open up more questions than answers, and Jane was beginning to feel like she was in over her head. But here's the thing, no one in Jane's life seemed to be as they appeared. It was like every person she trusted, every source of support she had, was somehow connected to the mystery, either by design or by accident. Her parents, who had always been her rock, were now distant and strange. Her best friend, Sarah, was acting like she was hiding something. The investigator had his own secrets. And Dr. Wright, the elusive scientist, could be the key to everything, or perhaps just another red herring to distract her from the truth. And then there was the possibility that Jane herself was being manipulated, that someone had intentionally set her on this path of confusion and uncertainty. But who would want to do such a thing, and why? Was Jane just a pawn in someone else's game? Each new lead Jane followed seemed to pull her deeper into a web of lies, deception, and mystery. She felt like she was chasing shadows, each twist and turn revealing another clue that only added to the confusion. There was a sense of paranoia creeping in. Was it possible that someone in her life had been playing a role all along, pretending to be someone they weren't? Was her entire reality just a carefully constructed illusion? She began questioning everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, and herself. And the more she uncovered, the more it felt like the walls were closing in around her. Jane's mind raced with possibilities, but one thing became clear: she was on the verge of discovering something huge, something that would change everything she thought she knew about herself. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth, or if anyone could handle what was about to come to light. Because, you see, the answers Jane was looking for were right in front of her all along, hidden in plain sight, buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths. And once she discovered them, there would be no going back. The deeper Jane dug, the more she realized that the line between truth and fiction was blurrier than she ever imagined. And now, she was closer than ever to uncovering the most shocking revelation of all. But the question remained, would the truth set her free, or would it destroy everything she held dear? The clock was ticking, and Jane knew that if she didn't get to the bottom of this soon, the consequences could be disastrous, not just for her, but for everyone involved. Just as Jane began to think she was inching closer to the truth, the universe seemed determined to throw obstacles in her way. What started as a faint whisper of uncertainty now felt like a relentless force, pushing her back at every turn. The first blow came one evening when she was at home, reviewing the files she'd painstakingly collected about the mysterious family. Among them was a set of handwritten letters that had been passed down from generation to generation, letters that seemed to hold a key piece of information about her identity. She had found these in an old family archive, a collection of documents that had been hidden away for years. The letters referenced a significant event that could be linked to the rare disease she was suffering from. She was on the brink of understanding what had happened, what had tied her life to this family she'd never met. But when she went to grab the folder the next morning, it was gone. Her heart sank as she searched her apartment, retracing every step she'd taken the night before. She had been so careful, there was no way she could have misplaced it. Someone had taken it. But who? And why? She hadn't told anyone about these letters, and the only people who knew about her investigation were her closest friends and family. The feeling of betrayal hit her hard. Was she being watched? Was someone actively trying to prevent her from getting closer to the truth? The disappearance of the letters felt like a warning, a sign that she was treading on dangerous ground. But this was only the beginning. As the days went on, Jane's sense of unease deepened. One evening, as she was sitting alone in her living room, trying to piece together the fragments of information she had, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was met by a familiar face, Sarah, her longtime friend. Jane had called her several times over the past few days, but Sarah had been avoiding her calls. Jane couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but she didn't expect Sarah to show up at her door, not like this. Sarah was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She had come to warn Jane. "You need to stop, Jane. You have to stop digging," she said in a low, urgent voice. The way Sarah spoke sent a chill down Jane's spine. "This isn't just about your health. It's bigger than that. You're getting too close. You have no idea what you're messing with." Jane was confused. Sarah had always been supportive, a voice of reason when things got tough. But now, her friend's words sounded more like a threat than advice. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Jane asked, her voice shaking. Sarah hesitated, her lips pressed together as if she was struggling to decide how much to reveal. "I can't tell you everything. But trust me, you're not ready for the truth. You don't know what's at stake here." The fear in Sarah's eyes was unmistakable, but so was the sense of urgency. Jane didn't know what to think. Was Sarah genuinely trying to protect her? Or was she hiding something? "Just promise me, Jane, you'll let this go. Forget about the DNA test, forget about the family, forget about all of it. Please." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. For the first time, Jane questioned Sarah's intentions. Why would her best friend, someone she had known for years, suddenly turn on her like this? Was she trying to protect her from something she didn't understand, or was there something more sinister at play? Sarah's warning only deepened the mystery, making Jane wonder if she could trust anyone around her. And yet, there was still a part of Jane that couldn't let go. She had come this far, and there was no way she was turning back now. But as she closed the door behind Sarah, the knot in her stomach tightened. Something wasn't right, and she was beginning to feel like she was playing a game where the rules kept changing. Determined not to let fear control her, Jane decided to meet with the private investigator once again. But when she called him to set up the meeting, she was shocked to find out that he was no longer available. The investigator's office, which had been a lifeline to her throughout the investigation, was now eerily empty. There was no answer when she called, and when she showed up in person, the building was locked. A "For Rent" sign hung in the window where his office had once been. Jane stood there for a long moment, staring at the sign, her heart racing. Had the investigator known something she didn't? Had he been a part of this all along? Or had he simply vanished, just like Dr. Wright, the geneticist who had disappeared years before? What was the connection between the investigator, Sarah, and the mysterious family? Was she being played by everyone around her? The sense of isolation was starting to weigh heavily on Jane. She couldn't trust the people closest to her, and the clues were slipping through her fingers. It felt like she was losing control, as if the world around her was shifting in ways she couldn't understand. The more she tried to dig into her past, the more she realized how little she actually knew. Every step forward seemed to take her 2 steps back. Her health, once her primary concern, had become secondary to the mystery that now consumed her every thought. She couldn't shake the feeling that the disease she was battling wasn't just a random affliction, it was a piece of something much bigger, something much darker. And just when she thought she couldn't be surprised anymore, she received an anonymous letter, slipped under her door in the dead of night. It was short, cryptic, and chilling. "You're not who you think you are. Stop before it's too late." There was no return address, no name, nothing but the ominous message and a faint smudge of ink at the bottom of the page, as if the writer had been in a hurry. Jane's pulse quickened as she reread the note over and over, trying to make sense of it. Who had sent it? And why now, after everything that had already happened? The letter was a turning point for Jane. It was clear someone was watching her, someone who didn't want her to uncover the truth. But who? And why? The walls were closing in faster now, and with every new obstacle, Jane could feel the danger growing. What was she really uncovering, and was she willing to risk everything to find out? Was her identity truly tied to the mystery she was trying to solve, or was this all just an elaborate scheme to drag her into something far worse than she could imagine? The stakes had never been higher, and Jane realized that every step she took was leading her deeper into a maze from which there might be no escape. As she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the letter in her hand, Jane couldn't shake the feeling that the end of her investigation was drawing near, though she had no idea if that end would be a revelation that set her free or one that trapped her in a web of deceit and lies forever. The truth was out there, but it seemed to be slipping away just as quickly as she could get close. Could she trust anyone? Would she find the answers she was looking for? Or was she walking into a trap from which there would be no return? The answers were out there, but the question now was, who was controlling the game? And was Jane strong enough to find out before it was too late? As Jane tried to process the anonymous letter, the weight of the situation settled deeper into her chest. The sense of urgency was palpable now. Every corner she turned seemed to hold a new danger, a new uncertainty. She had begun to question everything, her family, her friends, even herself. But just when she thought she had a grip on the situation, things took a turn she wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just her life that was at risk anymore. The danger was spreading, and it was coming for the people she loved most. Her brother, Michael, was the first to feel the ripple effect of the growing mystery. He had always been her rock, someone she turned to when everything else seemed to fall apart. But recently, Michael had been distant. He had stopped responding to her calls and texts, and when they did speak, it was always rushed and strained, as if he was hiding something. Jane had chalked it up to his hectic work schedule, but the nagging feeling in the back of her mind wouldn't let her dismiss it completely. She needed to talk to him, to get to the bottom of what was happening with him. So, one night, when she couldn't sleep, she drove over to his apartment, desperate for answers. When she arrived, Michael was there, but he wasn't alone. There was another figure sitting in the shadows, someone she didn't recognize. Jane's heart skipped a beat as she noticed how tense the room felt, the kind of tension that only exists when people are hiding something. Michael looked surprised to see her, almost guilty, and his eyes darted nervously to the stranger sitting on the couch. Without waiting for an explanation, Jane pushed past him, entering the apartment. "Who's this?" she demanded, her voice trembling but firm. The stranger, a man in his late 30s, stood up slowly, his eyes scanning her with an unsettling intensity. Michael quickly stepped in between them. "This is, just a friend, Jane. Nothing to worry about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jane wasn't buying it. She could feel the weight of the lie hanging in the air, and it only made her more suspicious. "A friend?" In the middle of the night, she shot back, her eyes narrowing. Michael looked like he wanted to say something more, but the stranger spoke first, his voice calm but with a sharp edge. You're digging too deep, Jane, he said, his words hanging in the air like a threat. You don't know what you're getting involved in, but you're getting dangerously close. I suggest you stop now before things get even more complicated. Jane froze. The man's words sent a chill down her spine, and for the first time, she realized just how high the stakes were. Was this man connected to the same people who had been sending her cryptic messages? Or was he part of something else, something even darker? Before she could respond, Michael stepped forward, his face flushed. What are you doing, man? This isn't what we agreed on. His voice was strained, his eyes pleading with the stranger, as if trying to push him away. But the man wasn't having it. He simply looked at Michael with a cold, detached expression and then turned back to Jane. Tell her everything, Michael. Tell her why you've been keeping secrets from her all this time. With that, he walked out of the apartment without another word, leaving Jane standing there, confused and shaken. Michael stood there, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't look like the brother she knew, the one who had always been open with her, the one she trusted. Jane's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Who was that man? What did he mean by tell her everything? And why had Michael kept quiet about whatever was going on? She turned to him, her voice tight with emotion. What was that? Who is he? What is all of this, Michael? Michael swallowed hard, his eyes avoiding hers. I can't explain right now, Jane. It's not safe. His voice trembled, and for a moment, Jane could see the fear in his eyes. This wasn't just about protecting her, it was about protecting himself too. Please, just trust me. I'll explain everything, but not tonight. You're not ready to know the truth. But Jane was done with secrets. She had been patient long enough, and her gut told her that whatever Michael was hiding was connected to the same twisted web she had been unraveling. She refused to let it go. I need answers, Michael. Now. Michael hesitated, looking like he was torn between telling her everything and protecting her from something much bigger than she could imagine. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping. Okay. I'll tell you everything. But you're not going to like it. Before Jane could ask another question, her phone buzzed in her pocket, the sudden noise cutting through the heavy silence in the room. When she looked at the screen, her blood ran cold. It was another message, this time from an unknown number. The message was brief, but its implications were clear. You're getting too close, Jane. We know what you're doing. Don't make us come after your brother. Her hands trembled as she read the words, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to spin. The threat was unmistakable. They were watching her. Watching Michael. And now, the people behind this were making it clear they would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. Jane's heart raced as she looked up at Michael, her mind reeling. Had the message been sent by the same people who had been trying to stop her? Was the stranger in her brother's apartment connected to this shadowy group? She needed to know more, but the realization hit her hard. The danger was no longer just about her. It was about everyone she cared about. And if she kept pushing, if she kept digging into the truth, there was no telling what kind of power was out there, waiting to strike. But just as quickly as the message appeared, it vanished from her phone. When Jane tried to open the conversation again, it was gone, completely wiped from her screen. Was it a warning? Or had someone tampered with her phone? She couldn't be sure. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. She wasn't going to stop. Not now, not when she was this close. But as she stepped back out into the world, with that new, twisted resolve inside her, a thought crossed her mind, a thought she had tried to ignore for days. What if she was already too late? What if she had already crossed a line, and now there was no going back? The deeper she dug, the more dangerous the waters became. And with every unanswered question, with every new threat that arrived, Jane couldn't help but wonder if the truth she was seeking was worth the cost. Or if, in the end, it was something that would destroy everything she held dear. Because as the days passed, the stakes continued to rise, and the people who were after her were getting closer. Much closer. And somewhere in the shadows, Michael's silence spoke volumes. The air in Jane's apartment felt heavier than ever before, weighed down by an overwhelming sense of unease. She'd spent days ruminating over the same questions, over the same trail of half-baked clues and cryptic messages, convinced that someone was trying to destroy her, someone with a deep connection to her past. But the more she thought about it, the more she felt like there was something she had overlooked. One little piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, something that didn't add up. And it wasn't until that night, when everything seemed to spiral out of control, that she realized the truth she had been chasing all along had been staring her right in the face. It started when she received a call from an unrecognized number, a call that sent an instant jolt of panic through her body. Her fingers trembled as she answered, half expecting it to be another threat or warning. But when the voice on the other end spoke, it wasn't a voice she was prepared for. "Jane, it's me. It's Michael," her brother's voice crackled through the receiver, distant but unmistakably familiar. Relief surged through her. She had been so terrified for him, so consumed with worry that hearing his voice felt like a small miracle. "I've been trying to reach you. There's so much you don't know." She sat down on the edge of her bed, her pulse quickening as she tried to keep her voice steady. "Michael, where have you been? Why haven't you? What's going on? What's happening?" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end. Then, just as she was about to ask again, Michael spoke in a hushed tone, almost as if he was afraid someone might hear him. "You have to listen to me, Jane. You've been chasing the wrong thing. All this time, all these threats, the messages, the danger, it's not what you think." Jane's heart skipped a beat. She had been chasing answers for weeks now, uncovering bits and pieces of a tangled web that made no sense. But what did he mean? How could it not be what she thought? The pieces were all aligning in a terrifying pattern, weren't they? "Michael, please, what are you talking about?" she pleaded, feeling a deep pit form in her stomach. "I never wanted you to find out. Not like this. But now it's too late. You're already in too deep, and there's no going back." Before she could respond, the line went dead. The phone went quiet, and for a moment, Jane just stared at it, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. Her brother had been trying to protect her, but from what? And why had he been so distant? What was the real reason he had been hiding from her? As the pieces began to settle in her mind, she realized with a sinking feeling that she hadn't been investigating the true story at all. The urgency in Michael's voice wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about protecting her from a truth that had the potential to destroy everything they thought they knew. She felt like she was on the edge of something huge, something monumental. But just as the weight of that realization hit her, she heard a knock at her door. It was a soft, tentative tap, but in the silence of the night, it was loud enough to make her heart stop. She didn't know who it was, but she wasn't about to answer without knowing who was on the other side. The tension in her chest made it hard to breathe, but she slowly moved toward the door, trying to remain calm, trying to think. Was this just another threat? Had someone followed her from the phone call? When she peered through the peephole, her breath caught. Standing outside was someone she least expected, Lena, her closest friend, the one person who had been by her side through all of this. The person she trusted most. At least, she thought she did. Lena had a strange look on her face, her eyes wide and searching, as if she was unsure whether or not to knock again. Jane hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Everything had been spinning out of control, and now Lena, the one person who had supported her through the most terrifying moments, was standing at her door with a look that was anything but reassuring. When Jane finally opened the door, Lena stepped inside without a word, her face pale and drawn. She immediately closed the door behind her, almost as if she was trying to keep something or someone out. The urgency in her movements only made Jane more suspicious, but before she could ask, Lena spoke, her voice low and strained. "Jane, you need to listen to me. There's something you don't know. Something I should have told you a long time ago. You're in danger. More than you realize." Her eyes flickered toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Jane's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift and blur into something much darker than she could have imagined. "What are you talking about, Lena?" Jane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean? What danger?" Lena swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "I didn't want to get you involved. I never meant for you to find out, but you're too far in now. I'm the one who's been sending the messages. The threats. The warnings. Jane's stomach dropped. The world around her seemed to slow down as Lena's words hung in the air. She couldn't process it at first. You? What? Why would you do that? Her voice cracked as she stepped back, her mind in a blur. Everything she had been investigating, all the dangers that had been closing in around her, had somehow been tied to her best friend. All along, it had been Lena behind the veil of secrecy. Lena looked down, unable to meet Jane's eyes. I had no choice. I couldn't let you find out the truth, Jane. Not the real truth. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with the weight of betrayal. Jane felt as though the floor had been ripped out from under her, as though everything she thought she knew had been turned upside down. Her mind was racing, trying to comprehend what Lena was saying, but the more she thought about it, the more everything started to make sense. The mysterious messages, the threats, the cryptic warnings, it had all been orchestrated, all a part of a plan to keep her from the truth. But why? What's going on? What truth? Jane demanded, her voice rising with panic. Lena finally met her gaze, her expression filled with a kind of sadness Jane hadn't seen before. The truth about who you really are, Jane. And about your family. You're not who you think you are. None of us are. I was trying to protect you from something that's going to change everything. The room felt like it was closing in on Jane. The truth about her family. What was Lena talking about? Had all of this been part of something bigger? Was she just a pawn in a much larger game? She couldn't stop the flood of questions that crashed over her. What was this truth that Lena was hiding? What had been buried for so long that it could destroy her and everything she thought she knew? And then, in the midst of the confusion, one thing became crystal clear. Jane was no longer in control. The truth was out there, but it was slipping further away with every passing second. And the people she had trusted most were the ones hiding the answers. Lena's next words sent a chill down her spine. I'm sorry, Jane. But there's no turning back now. They're coming for both of us. The room seemed to spin around Jane as Lena's confession hung in the air, thick with a tension that left no space for air. Her mind was reeling, each piece of the puzzle she had so carefully put together suddenly torn apart in an instant. She stood frozen, caught between the past and the unbearable weight of the unknown future. The truth that Lena had alluded to, the one that had been kept from her for so long, felt like an anchor around her neck. What was it? What was the secret that had been concealed from her all this time? The questions swirled like a storm inside her head, but none of the answers seemed to matter anymore, not when she was facing the harsh reality that the people she trusted the most were also the ones orchestrating this entire nightmare. Lena, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words felt like a million tons of pressure. How could you do this? How could you be behind everything? I trusted you. Lena flinched, but she didn't look away. The sorrow in her eyes was almost more than Jane could handle, yet it only fueled her anger, her betrayal. All this time, all these threats, all these fears, and it was Lena. She had been keeping Jane in the dark, protecting her from something, but what? She had lied to Jane, she had manipulated her, and now Jane was facing the aftermath of those lies. She felt as if her entire life had been a carefully constructed illusion, and every choice she had made was based on a false foundation. I didn't want to, Jane. You have to understand, this isn't what I wanted. But I had no choice. You wouldn't have believed me if I told you the truth from the start. You were too involved, too deep, Lena said, her voice cracking. It was never supposed to be like this. Jane's head pounded as she tried to process the torrent of emotions coursing through her. Betrayal. Confusion. Fear. She didn't know what to believe anymore. And more than anything, she felt powerless. The one person she thought would always have her back was the one who had been orchestrating her downfall. Lena wasn't just a friend. She had been an accomplice. A participant in a scheme that had kept Jane in the dark while pushing her deeper into a mystery that was beyond her understanding. What do you mean by that? What's really going on, Lena? Jane demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. You can't just tell me all this and expect me to understand. If you really cared about me, you'd tell me everything. You'd stop hiding things. What's the truth, Lena? What's the secret about my family? Lena shook her head, her face contorting in frustration. You don't get it, Jane. I'm trying to protect you. The truth is, it's dangerous. You don't know what they're capable of. I've kept you safe by keeping you out of it. But now, they're coming for both of us. And there's nothing we can do. Jane felt a sickening chill run through her. They're coming for both of us. Who was Lena talking about? Who was she so terrified of? This wasn't just some random conspiracy, it was a well-thought-out plan, something carefully orchestrated, and Jane was stuck in the middle of it. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and with every passing second, her options were running out. She could feel the walls closing in. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both Jane and Lena froze. The atmosphere in the room thickened, as if the very air had turned to lead. Lena's eyes widened in panic. She rushed to the door, but Jane grabbed her arm, stopping her in her tracks. Who's there? Jane whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. Lena didn't answer right away. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She glanced at Jane, her eyes full of unspeakable fear. Don't open it, she whispered urgently, almost pleading. It's them. They found us. Jane's blood ran cold. The words sent a chill through her spine that was as real as the pounding in her ears. It's them. Who were they? What had Lena gotten her into? Before she could speak, the door was forced open. A figure stood in the doorway, blocking the light from the hallway, casting a long shadow across the room. The figure was tall, wearing a dark coat, their face obscured by the dim light. Jane's stomach churned as they stepped inside without invitation, exuding an aura of power and control. There was a sense of finality in their presence, as if the game had changed and she was no longer a player, but a pawn. I told you to stop digging, Jane. The figure's voice was low, cold, and familiar. Jane felt a jolt of recognition, but she couldn't place it. But it seems you couldn't stay out of it. Now, there's no turning back. Lena stepped back, her eyes wide with fear, and Jane could feel the ground beneath her feet shift. Everything was slipping further out of her control. Who was this person? What did they want with her? Who are you? Jane asked, trying to sound braver than she felt, but the words came out hollow. What do you want from me? The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, they looked at Lena, who stood there, silent and trembling, as if she had already resigned herself to what was about to unfold. The silence between them stretched longer than Jane could bear. Then, the figure spoke again. You've been asking the wrong questions, Jane. And now, you're out of time. Out of time? Jane repeated, the words barely a whisper as they sank into her consciousness like a poison. What did that mean? Out of time for what? They stepped closer, their presence oppressive, their voice now calm but filled with an unmistakable authority. You have two choices, Jane. You can walk away. Forget everything. Leave your past behind, and we'll leave you alone. Or, you can continue down this path, and we'll make sure that no matter what, you won't have the life you think you do. We'll expose everything, the truth about your family, about your bloodline. It will destroy you. The air in the room became suffocating. Jane's thoughts scrambled as she processed the ultimatum. Walk away. Could she? Was that even possible after everything that had happened? And yet, the idea of abandoning everything she had worked for, of running away from this nightmare, felt like a betrayal of everything she had come to believe about herself. But then again, she could keep pushing, keep digging, and risk losing everything, her safety, her relationships, even her identity. Jane began, but her voice faltered. She didn't know what to say. The weight of the decision was suffocating, and her mind raced through the possibilities. If she walked away, would the danger really disappear? Or would she be running from the truth? Could she live with herself if she didn't pursue the answers she had come so far to uncover? Lena, whose face had been filled with fear just moments ago, now seemed resigned, almost defeated. Her voice was barely a whisper. Jane, please. You don't know what you're asking. You have no idea what's at stake. Please, just let it go. But Jane's heart was racing, her world crashing down around her. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest, suffocating her, as if her very soul was in the balance. There was no way out, no simple path forward. Whatever she chose would change everything. The figure took another step closer, their face still hidden in the shadows. You have until midnight. After that, it won't matter what you choose. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving Jane alone with Lena in the oppressive silence. The clock ticked in the background, each second feeling like it stretched out in agony, reminding her that time was running out. What would she do? The choice had never been more impossible. The tension in the room was suffocating. Jane's heart was pounding, her mind racing, and yet, for all the panic swirling inside her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play. The moment the figure in the dark coat had left, the oppressive weight of the ultimatum they had given her hung like a shadow, but it was the finality of their words that kept her frozen in place. You have until midnight. After that, it won't matter what you choose. The deadline ticked away in her head like a bomb about to explode, and every passing second felt heavier, more urgent. The truth she had been chasing all this time was slipping through her fingers, but the pieces that had been buried for so long were finally coming to light, each one darker and more dangerous than she could have imagined. Lena had backed away into the corner of the room, her face pale and filled with regret. Jane could see her trembling, but it was different this time. It wasn't just fear, it was guilt. A deep, undeniable guilt that made Jane's blood run cold. For a long moment, the silence stretched between them, filled only with the sound of Jane's frantic thoughts as she tried to process everything that had just happened. Her entire world had been turned upside down, but it was the way Lena was avoiding her gaze that unsettled her most of all. Lena, what aren't you telling me? Jane's voice broke the silence, quieter than she intended, but it was sharp with the kind of demand that no longer allowed for evasions. She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving Lena's face. What's really going on? Lena flinched, her eyes flicking toward the door as if expecting someone to barge in. Then, slowly, she exhaled, as if the weight of the secret she had been carrying for so long was finally too much to bear. I didn't want this to happen, Jane. I swear I didn't. But it's too late now. I should have told you sooner, but I couldn't. I didn't know who to trust. Jane's stomach twisted. Who do you mean? What do you know? Lena's eyes welled up with unshed tears. Your father, he's not who you think he is. The words hit Jane like a punch to the gut. Her father. The man she had looked up to her entire life, the one person who had always been there for her, through every struggle and every triumph. Her heart skipped a beat as Lena's next words rushed out, spilling the secrets that had been hidden for so long. Your father was involved in something, much bigger than you realize. He was part of a network, Jane, a secret society that's been pulling strings for decades. Everything, the DNA tests, the strange messages, the threats, it's all connected. The conspiracy, it's bigger than you could ever imagine. Jane's world spun. She felt as though the ground was being pulled out from beneath her. Her father, the one constant she thought she could rely on, had been playing a part in a game far darker and more dangerous than anything she could have imagined. But what did this all mean for her? For her family? She felt the heavy weight of betrayal pressing on her chest, suffocating her as the gravity of Lena's revelation hit home. How could he? Jane whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. How could he be part of something like that? How could you know? Lena looked down, tears spilling freely now. I didn't know everything at first. But as I got closer, as I learned more about what was happening, I realized that I couldn't keep you in the dark any longer. But it's dangerous, Jane. You don't know what you're up against. There are people involved, powerful people, who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. And if you keep digging, if you keep asking questions. Lena's voice trailed off, and Jane could feel the fear in her chest rise, an icy chill creeping into her bones. If I keep digging, what? They'll come after you. They'll come after us. And you won't be safe. A cold sweat broke out on Jane's forehead. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to forget everything. But she knew she couldn't. Not now. Not when she had finally uncovered the truth, or at least part of it. But the problem was, the more she learned, the more questions popped up. And those questions were pushing her toward the edge, threatening to plunge her into a world she wasn't sure she could survive. But before she could process any more of Lena's words, there was a loud crash from the other side of the room. The door, which they had both subconsciously been watching, suddenly slammed open with a violent force that sent Jane stumbling back. Figures stepped into the room, two of them, both dressed in dark suits, both exuding an air of authority and menace that sent a wave of panic through Jane's body. She recognized one of them instantly. It was Agent Donovan, the man who had been trailing her ever since she started this investigation. But the other figure, tall, silent, and impossibly calm, was someone she didn't recognize. And there was something cold in their eyes, something detached and calculating. "You've gone too far, Jane." Agent Donovan's voice was a low, controlled growl. "We gave you a chance to walk away. You should have taken it." Lena stepped back, her body shaking with fear, but Jane stood her ground, trying to muster every ounce of courage she had left. What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice more confident than she felt. "What is all of this? Why are you doing this to me?" Agent Donovan didn't answer immediately. Instead, his cold gaze flicked to Lena, then back to Jane. "Your father wasn't just a part of this, Jane. He was one of the leaders. He was integral to the operation. And now you've started to unravel it all. And that, my dear, is a problem." Lena gasped, her face draining of color. "You're lying. This isn't. We've spent generations building this network, this organization. You were always going to be a part of it. Your DNA, it's crucial. It's more than just a family connection. It's the key to everything." Jane could barely process his words. The air around her seemed to close in, and for the first time in her life, she felt utterly powerless. Her entire existence, her identity, everything she had built her life upon, had been a lie. Her father had used her. Her entire family had been part of a massive conspiracy, and the consequences of uncovering the truth were more devastating than she could ever have imagined. The pieces were falling into place, but they were revealing a nightmare she wasn't sure she could survive. "You wanted the truth, Jane?" Her father's voice cut through her thoughts. "Here it is. You're a part of something far greater than you can comprehend. The organization has been manipulating events for decades, and you've been a pawn in that game the whole time. And now, with the knowledge you've gained, they'll come for you. And me. And anyone who dares to oppose them." Suddenly, everything Jane had learned, the betrayals, the threats, the constant chase for answers, felt insignificant in the face of the cold reality her father was presenting. The conspiracy was massive. It was global, spanning generations, and it wasn't just about Jane. It was about control, power, and keeping the truth buried under layers of lies and manipulation. The stakes had always been higher than she had imagined. But then, just as the weight of the truth seemed unbearable, something unexpected happened. A sharp sound, a crack, broke the tension in the room, and before Jane could react, she was thrown forward, the world spinning around her as a heavy weight landed on her chest. She barely registered the pain in her shoulder as the man who had been standing behind her, the one who had been so quiet all this time, pressed a cold blade to her throat. "You've been digging in the wrong place." The man's voice was low, sinister. Jane's heart dropped. It was Thomas, her closest ally, the one person she had believed she could trust. And now, with a blade at her throat, she realized he had been a part of this all along. "Thomas, no," Jane started to protest, but the blade dug deeper, silencing her with the sharp pain. "You didn't listen, Jane," Thomas said, his voice cold, detached. "You were never meant to find out the truth. Now, you're going to pay the price for it." But as he spoke, something shifted in the room. For the first time, Jane could see it, doubt in his eyes. The cold, calculated look in his gaze faltered for a split second. Just enough time for Jane to make her move. She swung her arm up, grabbing his wrist with everything she had, twisting with desperation, and in one swift motion, the blade clattered to the floor. The air seemed to freeze as she spun around, her father's face unreadable in the dim light. Jane was breathing hard, her pulse pounding in her ears, but she wasn't done yet. She had one final question to ask, the question that would either set her free or end everything. "Who's really in charge?" she demanded, her voice hoarse but steady. "Who's pulling the strings?" Her father's lips curled into a tight smile, and he took a slow step back, his eyes glinting with something far darker than Jane had ever seen. You really want to know? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Then ask your mother. The world seemed to stop as the last piece fell into place. The final, unexpected twist. Everything Jane had known, everything she had believed, had just shattered. The truth she had been chasing, her father, her allies, everything, had been a carefully orchestrated lie. But the biggest revelation of all was yet to come. And as the room closed in around her, Jane realized she was standing on the precipice of a far darker conspiracy than she could have ever imagined. The truth wasn't just out there. It was in her blood. And now, it was too late to turn back. The clock ticked louder with every passing second, each one marking the narrowing window of time Jane had left before the world she knew would collapse around her. The walls of the dark, empty warehouse echoed the weight of her thoughts as she walked down the long hallway, the clatter of her footsteps the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. She could feel it now, the cold, heavy presence of the conspiracy closing in on her. Lena was gone. Thomas had betrayed her. Every person she had trusted had turned against her, and now, she was alone, with only the final pieces of the puzzle within her reach. Yet the truth, as elusive as it had been, felt dangerously close. Jane knew she was about to uncover something that would change everything, and there was no turning back. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension. It was the same place she had been led to just days before, when it all began to unravel. But now, as she made her way toward the back, her mind was racing with the possibility that she had finally reached the heart of the conspiracy. Every twist and turn had brought her here, to this cold, isolated place where the truth would finally be laid bare. There was no comfort in knowing this was the endgame, only the haunting realization that she had no idea what she would find when the pieces finally snapped together. As she stepped into the dimly lit room at the back of the warehouse, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing before her, was the man she had never expected to see, the one person whose betrayal would be the hardest to accept. It was her father. The same man who had been her pillar, her guide, her protector. But now, standing there in the flickering light, his face hardened and unreadable, he wasn't the father she had known. He was something else entirely. Dad, her voice trembled, the word catching in her throat as the shock of seeing him here, in this place, sunk in. You're behind all of this. Her father turned toward her, his expression unreadable, as if he had been expecting her. But there was no warmth in his eyes, no love, only cold calculation. The man she had trusted above all others was no longer her father. He was part of the machinery that had orchestrated her downfall. The DNA tests, the threats, the shadowy figures, the betrayals, they had all been pieces of a much larger game, a game that had been set in motion long before Jane had ever stumbled into it. You should have stayed out of this, Jane, he said quietly, his voice tinged with something Jane couldn't quite place, regret, perhaps, or maybe resignation. You were never meant to be a part of this world. A wave of disbelief crashed over Jane as she took another step forward, every fiber of her being screaming to understand. What world? What are you talking about? All I've wanted is the truth. What did you get me into? Her father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at her, his eyes cold and distant. Jane felt her chest tighten with the pressure of his silence, the weight of everything she had uncovered bearing down on her. Jane, what you don't understand is that your involvement wasn't a choice. It never was. From the moment you were born, you were part of something much bigger than yourself. The tests, the messages, everything, it was all part of a plan. A plan that you were always meant to follow, he said, his tone low and steady, but something about the way he spoke made Jane feel as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into an abyss that she had never seen coming. The pieces started to click into place in Jane's mind, but it was more terrifying than anything she had imagined. No. This is about bloodlines, isn't it? She spoke the words out loud, almost as if she were speaking to herself, the truth becoming clearer with every passing second. I wasn't just involved by accident, was I? This whole thing, my family, it's all part of this conspiracy. Her father's gaze hardened, and for a moment, the mask of control slipped. He looked almost ashamed. It's not just about bloodlines, Jane. It's about power. We've spent generations building this network, this organization. You were always going to be a part of it. Your DNA, it's crucial. It's more than just a family connection. It's the key to everything. Jane could barely process his words. The air around her seemed to close in, and for the first time in her life, she felt utterly powerless. Her entire existence, her identity, everything she had built her life upon, had been a lie. Her father had used her. Her entire family had been part of a massive conspiracy, and the consequences of uncovering the truth were more devastating than she could ever have imagined. The pieces were falling into place, but they were revealing a nightmare she wasn't sure she could survive. You wanted the truth, Jane? Her father's voice cut through her thoughts. Here it is. You're a part of something far greater than you can comprehend. The organization has been manipulating events for decades, and you've been a pawn in that game the whole time. And now, with the knowledge you've gained, they'll come for you. And me. And anyone who dares to oppose them. Suddenly, everything Jane had learned, the betrayals, the threats, the constant chase for answers, felt insignificant in the face of the cold reality her father was presenting. The conspiracy was massive. It was global, spanning generations, and it wasn't just about Jane. It was about control, power, and keeping the truth buried under layers of lies and manipulation. The stakes had always been higher than she had imagined. But then, just as the weight of the truth seemed unbearable, something unexpected happened. A sharp sound, a crack, broke the tension in the room, and before Jane could react, she was thrown forward, the world spinning around her as a heavy weight landed on her chest. She barely registered the pain in her shoulder as the man who had been standing behind her, the one who had been so quiet all this time, pressed a cold blade to her throat. You've been digging in the wrong place. The man's voice was low, sinister. Jane's heart dropped. It was Thomas, her closest ally, the one person she had believed she could trust. And now, with a blade at her throat, she realized he had been a part of this all along. Thomas, no, Jane started to protest, but the blade dug deeper, silencing her with the sharp pain. You didn't listen, Jane, Thomas said, his voice cold, detached. You were never meant to find out the truth. Now, you're going to pay the price for it. But as he spoke, something shifted in the room. For the first time, Jane could see it, doubt in his eyes. The cold, calculated look in his gaze faltered for a split second. Just enough time for Jane to make her move. She swung her arm up, grabbing his wrist with everything she had, twisting with desperation, and in one swift motion, the blade clattered to the floor. The air seemed to freeze as she spun around, her father's face unreadable in the dim light. Jane was breathing hard, her pulse pounding in her ears, but she wasn't done yet. She had one final question to ask, the question that would either set her free or end everything. Who's really in charge? She demanded, her voice hoarse but steady. Who's pulling the strings? Her father's lips curled into a tight smile, and he took a slow step back, his eyes glinting with something far darker than Jane had ever seen. You really want to know? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Then ask your mother. The world seemed to stop as the last piece fell into place. The final, unexpected twist. Everything Jane had known, everything she had believed, had just shattered. The truth she had been chasing, her father, her allies, everything, had been a carefully orchestrated lie. But the biggest revelation of all was yet to come. And as the room closed in around her, Jane realized she was standing on the precipice of a far darker conspiracy than she could have ever imagined. The truth wasn't just out there. It was in her blood. And now, it was too late to turn back.